Ban Ki-moon has called it a moral outrage and a criminal act. 3,000 Palestinians were seeking refuge in the building in Rafah at the time. Imtiaz Tayyab sent this report. A warning, you may find some of the images disturbing.
Chaos and death caused by an Israeli drone. This mobile phone video was shot just minutes after the strike. Witnesses tell us a missile was fired at a motorcycle parked only meters from a UN school being used as a shelter. Several people were killed and dozens wounded. More than 3.5 weeks into this conflict, and around 250,000 people now live in schools like this across the Gaza Strip. The shelters are meant to be safe havens from violence, but have now been targeted by Israeli fire at least 3 times.
These UN schools, which are being used as shelters, are clearly full of children who were killed and injured in the attack.
Tamer Bardawil shows me the footage he filmed just moments after the drone strike. He tells me what he saw.
The street was full of children buying sweets from the shop that's by the main gate. What did they do? They are only kids. So many people were dead. So many were hurt.
Most of the injured were brought here first. This is Rafah's Kuwaiti hospital. It specializes in obstetrics and only has around a dozen beds. But since the almost immediate collapse of Friday's 72-hour ceasefire, it has treated hundreds of people, many of them in the outdoor car park, which now doubles as a triage.
The Kuwait hospital is for maternity, not prepared for receiving this huge number of injured. Most of cases are transferred to Robi and Gaza Hospital and Nasser Hospital. And the road is very difficult. The ambulances are excluded by occupational force.
Rafah has seen some of the worst fighting in recent days. Between Friday and Sunday morning, more than 200 people were killed, many of them children. Imtiaz Tayyab, Al Jazeera, Rafah.
Earlier we spoke to Israeli Army spokesman Lieutenant Colonel Peter Lerner. He says the UN school was not the intended target.
We're targeting terrorists that were moving from one place to another. Perhaps they had some explosives on them that caused the extra damage. We struck the terrorists. This is the situation. We do not intentionally strike UN facilities. We just don't do that.
Well, the US State Department has issued a strong statement saying it's appalled by what it called the disgraceful shelling near the UN school. It says Israel must do more to meet its own standards and avoid civilian casualties. Kimberly Halkett reports.
Yet another attack on a United Nations school, this time in Rafah, where Gazans had been told they would be safe. The U.S. State Department stressed Israel must do more to avoid civilian casualties. In a statement, it said the suspicion that militants are operating nearby does not justify strikes that put at risk the lives of so many innocent civilians. From the United Nations, a spokesman for the Secretary General Ban Ki-moon called the UNRWA school shelling another gross violation of international law. The UN Agency for Palestinian Refugees also denounced the attack.
There is no doubt in my mind whatsoever that insufficient measures of precaution and control and protection are being taken, including by the Israeli Defense Force when engaging in Gaza.
Israel says its work destroying tunnels in Gaza is almost complete, and soon ground troops will be redeployed. But airstrikes will continue, and Israel says it will not participate in ceasefire talks in Cairo. The Israeli ambassador to the United States, speaking on U.S. television, says the priority now is to see that Hamas is unable to rearm in the future.
What we don't want to see is us simply leaving and allowing Hamas to use the time to simply rearm thousands of rockets, more tunnels. We have to make sure that we have an effective mechanism to prevent Hamas from rearming and refueling its war machine.
Still, the European Union is calling for the bloodshed to stop and is pushing both Israeli and Palestinian leaders to work toward a political solution as the only hope for lasting peace. It's a view the Palestinian ambassador to the UN supports.
If we allow for peace to take place, negotiation to take place, under the leadership of President Mahmoud Abbas, if we empower this government, we will be able to move gradually from the situation of confrontation and fighting into the situation of lifting, this tragedy and blockade against our people in Gaza.
It is a tragedy that has prompted protests all over the world, including this one Saturday in Washington, the largest U.S. demonstration yet in protest of the rising civilian casualties in Gaza. Kimberly Helkett, Al Jazeera, Washington.
Well, as Israel's offensive stretches into its 27th day, the human cost continues to rise. 64 Israeli soldiers have now been killed and 3 civilians, one of whom was a Thai national. At least 1,809 Palestinians have been killed. The UN estimates around 80% of those are civilians. At least 9,339 Gazans have been injured, including more than 2,700 children, and more than 250,000 people are now taking refuge in UN shelters.